Hello, everyone. Tonight we begin with something real, something raw, something that's been whispering in your ear when the lights are off and no one's around. There is a silent enemy that lives inside your mind. And no, it doesn't wear a mask or carry a weapon. It's quieter than fear, subtler than shame, and more patient than time. It waits, it studies, and it knows exactly when to show up. Right when you're most tired, most uncertain, most alone. You might not survive this, unless you learn to see it. So, before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you truly enjoy what I'm doing here. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. I want to feel like we're in this together, no matter where the world finds us. Now, turn off the lights, maybe turn on a fan for some gentle noise, and let's embark on tonight's journey together. It started slowly, like a static buzz in the back of my brain. I remember one morning, brushing my teeth, staring at my reflection, and hearing the quiet jab. You're already behind. Behind what? Who knows? But it didn't matter. That voice didn't need logic. It just needed volume. It's strange, right? How we can be perfectly still and yet feel like we're being chased. As if 1,000 tiny critics live inside us, each holding a megaphone and a magnifying glass. You forget where you put your keys. You're careless. You check your phone and see someone thriving. You're failing. You cancel plans because you're exhausted. You're unreliable. No one around you says these things, but your own mind does, relentlessly. And we listen. We always listen. Sometimes I think our thoughts have better PR teams than we do. Now here's a quirky side note for you. Did you know the average person has around 60,000 thoughts a day? That's like scrolling Twitter for 16 hours straight. But all the tweets are written by your anxious inner child. Yikes. But here's the thing. Not every thought deserves a seat at your table. Most of them don't even bring snacks. Yet we let them in, offer them coffee, and ask them to stay forever. There's a public academic debate about this too. Cognitive scientists and psychologists have long argued whether thoughts precede emotions or the other way around. But regardless of which comes first, the result is clear. Unchecked thoughts become the architects of emotional chaos. And emotional chaos is exactly what was brewing in me. I'd lie awake at night replaying a casual conversation I had 6 years ago, convinced I said something wrong. Or I'd be out with friends and suddenly feel like I was faking it all, like a fraud dressed in borrowed confidence. This wasn't sadness. It wasn't anxiety in the clinical sense. It was something sneakier, something more existential. Like my own brain had become an echo chamber of every voice that ever doubted me. Parents, teachers, exes, strangers on the internet, rebroadcasting the same message over and over again. You're not enough. You ever felt that? Not just heard it, but felt it. Like your chest tightens, your shoulders fold inward, your eyes scan the room for escape. And the worst part? No one else notices. You smile, you nod, you keep the illusion running smoothly while inside, your thoughts are holding a full-blown coup. That's what I mean by a silent enemy. It doesn't attack with noise, it corrodes from within. Carl Jung, the guy who basically psychoanalyzed humanity before it was trendy, understood this deeply. He wrote that people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. That's because when you sit with yourself in silence, you don't just find peace. You find the monsters under your mental bed. And let me tell you, mine were feral. There's this old memory I have of being 8 years old, standing in front of the class trying to read out loud. I stumbled over a word. Photosynthesis, of all things. And the entire room burst into laughter, including the teacher. That moment, it tattooed itself onto my subconscious. And every time I speak in public now, that 8-year-old version of me peeks out, whispering, "Don't mess up, they're all watching." Isn't that wild? That something so small, so far away, can still shape who I am today. That's why we need to talk about this. Because those thoughts aren't random. They're old programs. Some were uploaded before we even knew what self-worth meant. And unless we acknowledge them, they'll run our lives like ghost apps draining our battery. But here's where things start to shift. What if those thoughts weren't you? Think about that. What if the voice saying, "You're a failure," isn't your voice at all, but one you inherited? What if you're not broken, just badly programmed? That idea, it broke something open in me. I remember sitting in a cafe, halfway through an overpriced matcha latte, and suddenly realizing, wait, if these thoughts aren't me, then who am I? And in that silence, that sacred pause, something else emerged, a whisper softer than the critic, but infinitely stronger. You are the awareness, not the noise. Now that's when the real story begins. I didn't know it at the time, but that whisper. You are the awareness, not the noise, was the first time I met my real self. Not the self built from old report cards, bad breakups, or high school cafeteria trauma, but the quiet, steady presence behind all of that. Like finding a lighthouse in the middle of a storm you thought would never end. Carl Jung once said that hell isn't some fiery realm buried beneath the crust of the earth. Hell is the chaos we carry within us. The unexamined, the denied, the painful things we bury so deep we forget they're there, until they start showing up in our daily lives as confusion, anxiety, or random emotional meltdowns over spilled oat milk. And honestly, that made more sense to me than any Sunday school lesson ever did. I remember one afternoon, sitting in traffic with the sun melting through the windshield, when this thought drifted in. You always mess things up. You're late again. You'll never get your life together. And I just sat there, not reacting, not pushing it away, just watching. And in that moment, it hit me. This is hell, not flames, not demons, but being trapped in a loop of self-punishment that no one else can see. The weirdest part? From the outside, my life looked pretty fine. I had a job that paid the bills, friends who liked me, a phone full of memes. But on the inside? It was like someone left a radio on full blast in a language I didn't understand. Just noise and more noise. And here's the kicker. Most of us live that way, like haunted houses, perfectly painted on the outside, but full of rattling chains and unexplained cold drafts on the inside. There's a public academic debate that always fascinated me. Can humans truly be conscious of the unconscious while still remaining sane? Freud said we'd fall apart. Jung believed we'd be set free. I think they were both right. Freedom, it turns out, isn't all cozy throws and warm chamomile tea. It's messy. It's disorienting. It's like someone throwing open all the windows in a dusty house and suddenly seeing everything that's been festering in the corners. And man, my corners were crowded. There was that guilt I'd carried for years over not calling my grandma enough before she passed. The fear that I peaked emotionally at age 20. The quiet panic that maybe I'd never really be happy, just busy. Have you ever had thoughts like that while doing something totally mundane? Folding laundry, maybe? Or scrolling through your feed? And out of nowhere comes that slow, cold whisper. This is all pointless. That's not sadness talking. That's your mind revealing just how deep the clutter goes. And the most dangerous part? We normalize it. We treat it like background noise, like bad elevator music that we can't turn off, so we just hum along. But here's a quirky realization I had while accidentally dropping my toothbrush into the toilet. Don't ask. Sometimes, rock bottom isn't a dramatic crash. Sometimes it's a slow realization that you've been drowning in thoughts you never chose, but you kept swimming in them because they were familiar. And familiarity is seductive, even when it hurts. Let me tell you about this woman I met at a grief group I went to once. She had lost her partner years ago, but she still wore his watch every day. Not because it comforted her, but because the pain had become her identity. She told me, "If I stop grieving him, I don't know who I am." That's when I realized something chilling. We cling to pain because at least it's something we recognize. We build our inner world around it, decorate it, even guard it, because the unknown feels scarier than the suffering we've come to accept. Carl Jung would call that the complex, these invisible emotional knots in our psyche that form around unprocessed pain. And boy, did I have a few of those. And here's the thing most people won't tell you. These thoughts don't scream. They don't kick down the door. They seep in like fog, slowly, stealthily, until one day you realize you can't see anything clearly anymore. Not your goals, not your relationships, not even your own worth. Now, before this gets too bleak, let me tell you something hopeful. A kind of old age wisdom I picked up from an elderly neighbor named Mrs. Tate. She was in her 80s and still grew tomatoes on her tiny balcony. I once asked her how she managed to stay so cheerful. She said, "Sweetheart, I tend my thoughts like I tend my garden. I pull out the rotten ones, talk to the new ones, and water the ones that feed me." Simple, brilliant, and totally on brand with Jung's theories, whether she knew it or not. So I started doing that too. Not gardening, I'm terrible with plants, but watching my thoughts, tending to them. At first it felt impossible, like playing emotional whack-a-mole. Every time I thought, "I'm not good enough," I tried to just observe it, not argue, not run, just notice. And let me tell you, the first time you truly observe a negative thought without being swallowed by it, it's like switching from black and white TV to full-color high def. You see the shape of it, the tone, the origin, and sometimes, just sometimes, you realize it's not even your voice. It sounds like your mother, or your 7th grade gym teacher, or that boss who called you too sensitive in front of the whole team. And you start asking, why am I still listening to them? That's when hell begins to turn into something else. Not heaven. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. But maybe, just maybe, into a path. A way forward. And that whisper? The one that said, "You are the awareness?" It gets louder, braver, clearer. You start to realize, if this chaos lives in your mind, then so does the cure. I don't remember exactly when I began noticing the seeds. Not literal seeds. No one was out here planting petunias in my brain, but emotional ones, mental ones. The kind that start as tiny thoughts, seemingly harmless. A comment from a friend, a weird look from a stranger, one mistake I couldn't stop replaying. At first they seemed like nothing. A shrug, a mental note, a sigh. But they stuck, and over time, I realized those little seeds had grown vines. They wrapped around my sense of worth. They dug into the soil of how I saw myself. And eventually, they bloomed into entire storylines. You're always too much. You ruin good things. You'll never really be happy. They didn't shout, they whispered. They nestled in like unwanted houseguests, ordering takeout on my mental dime and throwing judgmental glances at all my dreams. And worse, I watered them. Every time I believed them, every time I repeated them, every time I didn't challenge them. That's when it hit me. Thoughts aren't just passing clouds. Some of them come with roots. Now, here's a quirky thought. Have you ever noticed how a single negative thought can derail your whole day, but it takes like 5 compliments and a puppy parade just to feel decent again? It's like our brains are these suspicious little gremlins who only accept ID from misery. There's a reason for that. Some neuroscientists argue our brains have a built-in negativity bias. It helped our ancestors survive saber-toothed tigers, sure, but now it just makes us spiral over someone not texting back for 6 hours. And here's where Carl Jung enters the chat again. He warned us, what we ignore grows. What we deny controls us. That includes those seeds, the unconscious beliefs that flourish in the dark, where we never shine light. I used to think I was just broken, like uniquely cursed. But the more I talked to people, the more I realized everyone has their version of this jungle. For one person, it's the belief that they're unlovable. For another, that they'll never succeed. For me, it was this persistent fear that no matter what I did, I'd always fall short of some invisible finish line. And if I'm being honest, I still wrestle with that sometimes. But now, I see the pattern. I recognize the vine before it strangles the flower. Here's something that surprised me. I had no idea how many of my thoughts weren't even mine. Like, they were downloaded from childhood, school, culture, old relationships, Instagram influencers telling me I need to be grinding 24/7 or I'm wasting my life. But once you start paying attention, you notice the origin tags. Like, you'll never make it on your own. That's not me. That's my dad, tired from his own wounds, or you're selfish for resting. Wait. That's that boss who once emailed me at midnight and then complained I wasn't committed. Once you realize these aren't your authentic thoughts, they lose a little of their magic. The spell starts to break. There's been an academic tug-of-war about whether early childhood or later adult experiences shape our inner narrative more. But Jung would probably smirk and say, it doesn't matter. What matters is whether you know what you're repeating. And oh boy, I was repeating. Every failure, every awkward moment, every rejection. I kept playing it like a sad little greatest hits album on repeat. And without realizing it, those moments became my story. They were the seeds that became roots, that became walls. And that's the real danger. Because after a while, you stop planting. You stop dreaming. You just live inside this overgrown jungle of not enough. But guess what? Every jungle can be cleared. Every mind can be reseeded. I learned this from someone unexpected, a retired art teacher named Theo I met at a meditation retreat. He had this calm energy, like someone who once battled a lot of ghosts and finally decided to stop letting them redecorate his house. One night, under a sky so full of stars it felt like it would spill over, he told me, "Your thoughts are like plants. Some need pruning. Some need patience. Some need to be uprooted entirely. But none of them are you." And I just sat there, half zoning out from sleep deprivation and herbal tea. But that line stayed with me. None of them are you. Can I tell you how freeing that was? That the thought that says you're a fraud isn't proof. It's just a weed. That the one that says, you always mess things up, is just leftover debris from a storm that passed years ago. And here's a weirdly comforting realization. Even weeds grow from somewhere, which means I can trace them back. I can learn. I can even forgive where they came from. That's the part most people skip. They try to bulldoze their thoughts without understanding their roots. But Jung taught us, transformation isn't in denial. It's in integration. So I started journaling every time a dark thought hit. Not to wallow, but to name it, to ask it questions. Like, where did you come from? Or, who taught me this? And most times, that thought was just a frightened voice trying to keep me safe from something that wasn't even happening anymore. Isn't that wild? That the same mind that tells you you'll fail is just trying to prevent the pain of a memory from 10 years ago? So I began to thank the thoughts, not believe them, not obey them, but thank them. Thanks for trying to help, but I'm not in danger anymore. I'm pursuing. And slowly, I cleared a little space, just enough to plant something new. You ever walk into a room and it's so quiet you can hear your own heartbeat? Now imagine that, but inside your head. No phone, no podcast, no background TV show playing while you pretend to clean. Just you. The silence. And that voice inside. That's when it creeps in, doesn't it? Not the sound of a creaking floorboard or some ghostly whisper. No, the real terror is your own mind digging up every single moment you've ever felt like a failure, like clockwork, like a twisted highlight reel curated by your insecurities. There's a term for that: rumination. Psychologists call it the loop of overthinking. I call it mental Netflix, but make it horror. It's like your brain has a direct line to all the bloopers and bloated expectations you never lived up to, and it loves rewatching them. But what no one tells you is how exhausting that gets. It's not just mentally tiring, it's soul-tiring. Because even when your life looks fine on paper, there's a shadow show playing behind your eyes. And you feel like you're fighting a war no one even knows is happening. That's the pain of unseen battles. The pain of looking like you've got it all together while secretly unraveling like a cheap sweater. Let me paint you a picture. I was sitting at a friend's birthday dinner. Candlelight, laughter, great food. From the outside? Bliss. But internally? I was spiraling because I'd said something awkward 5 minutes earlier and convinced myself everyone was secretly judging me. Spoiler: they weren't. They were just enjoying their crème brûlée. But my mind? It was building an entire courtroom drama where I was both the defendant and the jury. And you know what made it worse? The fact that I knew it wasn't rational, but I still believed it. There's a public academic debate on this paradox. How can we hold irrational beliefs while simultaneously being aware they're irrational? Some call it cognitive dissonance. Jung would call it shadow interference. I call it Tuesday, because when the untrained mind is left alone, it doesn't default to peace. It defaults to patterns. Most of our suffering isn't because of what's happening now. It's because of the unprocessed echoes of what's already happened. Like trauma ghosts that show up uninvited, drinking your emotional coffee and leaving muddy footprints all over your confidence. And here's the weird part. You start getting used to it. You begin to anticipate the storm. Like, oh, there goes that good thing. I wonder how I'll mess it up this time. You build a strange kind of comfort in chaos, because predictability feels safer than the unknown. I had this realization during a sleepless night, because of course it was night. I was lying there thinking, if my thoughts are attacking me even when nothing's wrong, who exactly am I fighting? And that's when it hit me like a sleepy slap in the face. I wasn't fighting anyone. I was just exhausted from shadowboxing my own memories. It reminded me of something my great-uncle once told me. He was a veteran, sharp as a tack even in his 90s. He said, "Kid, the worst battles ain't the loud ones. It's the quiet ones where you bleed on the inside and no one sees." That stuck with me, because it's true. People think strength is never breaking, but real strength is breaking in silence and still choosing to show up the next day. That quiet ache, that invisible war. Most of us carry it. But we've been taught to hide it, to wrap it in productivity, to laugh through it. to post about our breakfast smoothie and pretend everything's fine. And maybe it is. On the surface. But what about underneath? You see, most emotional wounds don't scream. They leak, slowly, into our relationships, our decisions, our sense of self. They shape how we love, how we react, how we trust. You don't respond sharply because someone was late. You react because somewhere, deep down, you felt abandoned. You don't panic because you messed up a work presentation. You panic because you've internalized the belief that your worth is tied to performance. Jung taught that these unconscious beliefs, the ones that formed when we were too young to question anything, become the filters we use to see the world. And unless we learn to clean those filters, we'll keep projecting our old wounds onto new experiences. Let me tell you about Sarah. A friend of mine, warm-hearted and deeply empathetic. But she'd sabotage every good relationship she entered. Why? Because, in her words, they're just going to leave anyway. It took years for her to realize that voice wasn't hers. It was her mom's, who used to pack a bag every time they argued when she was little, threatening to leave. That seed planted a belief. Love. Abandonment. And every time she got close to someone, that belief bloomed again. Like clockwork. You see, pain doesn't need a reason to repeat itself. It just needs silence. So when people say things like, just move on, or don't overthink, I smile politely. But inside, I'm thinking, sweetheart, if I could switch off my thoughts like Spotify, I would have done it by now. The truth. You can't just silence negative thoughts. You have to understand them. It's like being in a haunted house. You don't banish the ghost by ignoring it. You banish it by learning its name, hearing its story, and letting it go. So I started asking different questions. Not, why am I like this, but who taught me to be like this? Not, why can't I be happy? But, what belief is telling me I'm not allowed to be? And those questions cracked open something new. A tiny window, a sliver of light, a quiet space between thoughts. And in that space, I could breathe again. Positive thinking is cute until your mind starts swinging back with a frying pan made of self-doubt. You know what I'm talking about? Those well-meaning voices that chirp. Just think happy thoughts, like they're auditioning for a discount Peter Pan remake. And don't get me wrong, I appreciate the optimism. I really do. But when your brain is a haunted mansion filled with trapdoors, random crying closets, and judgmental portraits whispering unworthy. As you pass by, a sunny mantra isn't exactly going to save the day. This is where Carl Jung separates himself from the herd. He didn't tell people to just think positive. In fact, he might have flinched at the idea. Jung understood something most self-help books skip over. The human mind isn't a light switch. It's more like an ancient library with secret passageways, old curses, and a few talking ravens. He taught that shallow advice doesn't reach the unconscious. It's like throwing glitter on a leaking pipe and calling it home improvement. There's a heated academic debate in psychology between behavior-focused cognitive models and the depth-oriented Jungian school. One tries to rewire your thoughts like a mechanic replaces spark plugs. The other digs into the story underneath the thoughts, the origin, the shadow. And I don't know about you, but I'm not looking for duct tape therapy. I'm looking for something real. I remember this moment clearly. I was standing in line at the grocery store, holding a frozen pizza and almond milk, when I caught my reflection in the glass. And right there, in the fluorescence of aisle 7, my brain whispered, "Everyone can see you don't have it together." It wasn't just a thought. It was a sentence, loaded with 1,000 buried memories. Like that time I bombed a presentation, or when my ex said I was too much, or when I didn't get picked for the school play in 8th grade and convinced myself I wasn't worthy of attention. All of that, baked into one passing thought. You can't slap a sticky note on that kind of weight and expect it to hold. Affirmations aren't magic spells. You can't just say, "I am loved," and expect your inner critic to throw up a white flag and vanish like a cartoon villain. Unless you know where the wound is, no bandage sticks. That's why Jung's approach resonated with me. He didn't preach about running from darkness. He invited people to sit down with it, pour it a cup of tea, and say, "All right, what do you want me to know?" Which, by the way, is also exactly what my therapist said the first time I tried to brush off a painful memory with a forced laugh. She looked me dead in the eye and said, "No jokes. Sit with it." Horrifying. But also transformative. Because the truth is, healing doesn't begin with avoidance. It begins with honesty. Let me share an example. A guy I met at a retreat, let's call him Mark, said he used to meditate obsessively, like hours a day, but not because he was enlightened. It was because he was running from his own thoughts. Meditation, for him, became a fancy form of emotional bypass. He wasn't listening to himself. He was silencing himself. That's not healing. That's muting. And here's where it gets personal. I tried the same thing, sort of. I became the master of pretending everything was fine. I'd post encouraging captions, crack jokes, smile at parties. But inside? A pile of unresolved conversations, ghosted texts, and dreams I'd buried so deep I forgot they ever mattered. And at some point, I realized something terrifying. I wasn't lying to other people. I was lying to myself. Positive thinking without shadow work is like painting over mold. It looks fine for a week, and then suddenly your ceiling collapses. But there's a way out. Not an easy one, but a real one. You have to stop pretending your mind is a Pinterest board. You have to look at the rot, the leaks, the cracked foundation. And not just look. Understand. The first time I really did this, I felt like I was crumbling. I sat in bed, no distractions, no headphones, just me and the question. What's the belief behind this sadness? And the answer? I think I'm not lovable unless I'm perfect. It hit me like a freight train, wrapped in childhood memories and awkward middle school dances, but weirdly. After I saw it, it lost some of its grip, not all of it. I still wrestle with it sometimes. But now I know its face, I know its name. You can't disarm a ghost if you won't admit it's there. This reminds me of a bit of wisdom my grandfather used to say when I got overwhelmed trying to fix a broken toy. Don't force it, understand it. That line? It works for minds too. And here's the quirky realization I had while eating cereal at 2 a.m. in mismatched socks. Self-love isn't loud. It's not always motivational speeches or bath bombs. Sometimes it's just refusing to believe the worst about yourself for one more night. It's holding a quiet boundary. It's journaling through the fog. It's saying, "No, I'm not perfect, but I'm still worthy of peace." That's real transformation. That's what Jung pointed toward. Not blissful ignorance, but conscious courage. You don't kill negative thoughts with positivity. You outgrow them with truth. And if you're still reading this, if you've followed me down this rabbit hole of shadows and pizza aisle breakdowns, then you've already started. You're not looking away anymore. You're looking in. There comes a moment, often when you're lying awake at 2:11 a.m., staring at a ceiling you suddenly notice has water stains, when you realize you can't run from yourself forever. That was the night I truly met my shadow. Now, let me just clarify something. The shadow isn't some spooky villain with glowing red eyes and a creepy laugh. No horror movie cliches here. Jung described the shadow as the unconscious part of ourselves we suppress. The envy, rage, fear, grief, shame, all the bits we tuck away behind polite smiles and motivational quotes. You know, the things we think make us bad or less spiritual or just plain too much. But the thing is, what we hide doesn't vanish. It festers. It projects. It starts showing up in your tone with loved ones, your irrational jealousy, your weird fear of commitment, or that time you snapped at your barista because they wrote your name as Greg when you're clearly a Sarah with no H. I used to believe that the goal was to erase these parts of myself, like I could just bleach out the ugly bits and emerge glowing and pure like a kombucha-sipping guru. But no one tells you that spiritual Clorox doesn't work on the psyche. True growth, as it turns out, starts when you stop trying to be clean and start trying to be whole. I was journaling one morning when it hit me. Every time I felt triggered, rejected, or suddenly anxious, I wasn't responding to the present. I was responding to my shadow, a younger version of myself that had been silenced, judged, or ignored. And that realization changed everything. I stopped asking, how do I get rid of this feeling? And started asking, what is this part of me trying to say? Let me give you a real example. One afternoon, a friend canceled on me last minute. I said it was fine, sent a chill, no worries text, and even added a smiley face. But inside, fireworks of insecurity. Thoughts like, they don't value you, you're not important. Was it about the cancellation? No, it was about 8-year-old me, waiting outside school for a ride that never came. That moment etched something in my psyche, a belief that being forgotten equals being unlovable. And the adult me? Still reacting to that blueprint. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." That quote isn't just deep, it's devastatingly accurate. There's an academic thread that debates whether we're products of free will or internal programming. Jung sort of sidestepped both camps and said, how about you look at your shadow and then decide who you want to be? Shadow work is like emotional archaeology. You start digging through the ruins of your past, not to live there, but to understand the architecture of your present. But I'll be real with you. It's not pretty. One day you're sipping your latte, thinking you're healing, and then suddenly you're crying in a Target parking lot because a song reminded you of a friend who ghosted you in 2014. Healing doesn't have great timing. It shows up like a drunk uncle, uninvited, but always carrying truth bombs. One of my favorite quirky moments during this journey was when I tried mirror work for the first time. You know, looking into the mirror and saying kind things to yourself? Sounds beautiful, right? Well, I stared into my own eyes and said, I love you. My reflection blinked, and I immediately burst out laughing. Not because it was funny, because it felt so fake, so uncomfortable. And that discomfort? That's where my shadow lived. It's wild how we can love others so easily, celebrate them, compliment them, forgive them, and yet withhold the same grace from ourselves. Why is it easier to accept someone else's brokenness than our own? Probably because we were raised to hide ours. Here's a little wisdom I picked up from my Aunt Mabel, an absolute legend with a lipstick collection that could supply a Broadway show. She once told me, honey, if you don't sit with your shadow, it'll show up at the worst possible time, usually when someone else is watching. And she was right. The parts of ourselves we suppress don't just vanish. They leak. They come out in sarcasm, in passive-aggressive texts, in that weird anxiety before someone sees your real self. And the antidote? Compassion. Not indulgence, not excuses, but the radical act of saying, I see you, you're part of me, and I'm listening now. Because when you listen to your shadow, it softens, It stops screaming. It starts whispering truths you didn't know you needed. Like, you're allowed to feel anger. You're allowed to be scared. You're allowed to be healing and still be worthy of love. That kind of honesty is scary at first. It feels like emotional skydiving without a parachute. But let me tell you, on the other side of that freefall is a kind of freedom you didn't know existed. You stop filtering your soul. You stop editing yourself down to fit someone else's comfort level. And you start living from the inside out, not the outside in. And here's the unexpected joy. Once you face your shadow, you can stop being afraid of being found out. Because you already found yourself. That's the paradox. The more darkness you're willing to hold, the more light you're able to carry. Not because you've eliminated the pain, but because you've integrated it. So if you're waiting to fix yourself before you start living fully, don't. You're not a broken machine. You're a complex mosaic. Every crack, every color, every sharp edge belongs. And if your shadow is still whispering fears tonight, just smile softly and whisper back. I see you, but I lead now. Tukutsuran Antuson. Doi Jai Laban Vietlei. Part 7 Dorbang Tieng An, Tuan Tujung Yokao, Gyulai Huang, 60% Noidungok. 40% Sang Taumoi, Ando, Vajambao Tiep Noi Machikechuyen Ungoi Tunhat, Fong Kachenhen Hang, Sao Lang, Pachut Hai Huoks Diudang, Vachet ISMR, Nhun Hang Fan Truok. It's strange how quickly a single thought can shape your entire day. I'll be doing something ordinary, folding socks, waiting for the kettle to boil, and then out of nowhere, a voice will pipe up like an uninvited guest. You're wasting your life. I don't even flinch anymore. That voice has become familiar, like a nosy neighbor who thinks she's helping by pointing out all your flaws from behind her curtain. But here's the thing. Just because a thought shows up doesn't mean it deserves a seat at the table. Carl Jung believed the mind isn't a fixed identity, but a system of patterns, many of them inherited or absorbed unconsciously. Which means a lot of the stuff floating around in our heads, not even ours to begin with. That idea rocked me. It made me question every mental loop I'd been trapped in, those recurring thoughts that sounded like, me! But when I listened closely, carried the accents of old teachers, grumpy relatives, childhood disappointments, and late-night internet doom scrolls. I once heard a phrase that felt like truth. You are not the thought. You are the thinker. And that right there, that's the shift, the quiet rebellion. Most of us go through life responding to our minds like they're the boss of us. But the moment you realize you can observe your thoughts instead of obey them, that's when the inner power begins to wake up. There's an ongoing academic debate. Are our thoughts reflective of our identity, or do they merely arise from our conditioning? Honestly, it doesn't even matter, because once you become aware, you get to choose. And choice, that's where the healing lives. I started noticing my old scripts. You know the ones. You always ruin good things. Nobody really likes you. You're too much. I didn't try to fight them. I just listened, like someone watching clouds pass across the sky, and then I whispered, I'm not going with you today. I imagine them like loud passengers on a train. I hear them, but I don't have to ride with them. I can stay seated, sip my metaphorical tea, and stare out the window instead. A quirky thing I started doing. I began naming the thoughts, not in a serious way, more like characters from a sitcom. The voice that panics about my to-do list? That's Janice. The one that makes me compare myself to everyone online? That's Larry. And the one that still whispers old childhood insecurities? Definitely Aunt Carol. Giving them names helped me laugh a little. And laughter, believe it or not, is powerful shadow work. Humor invites softness. And softness is what lets transformation sneak in. Old age wisdom moment? My high school science teacher, Mr. Holbrook, used to say, "Don't believe every hypothesis. Test it." I apply that to my thoughts now. So when my brain throws out, "You're behind in life," I don't panic, I test it. Behind according to what? Whose timeline? Whose voice? Most of the time, the thought crumbles under a single breath of honest questioning. That's the magic of the second thought. The first one might come from conditioning. It might carry pain. But the second one? That's yours to choose. That's the one where you reclaim your story. I'm a failure. Pause. Breathe. Actually, I'm learning, slowly but surely. And every time you choose a different response, it rewires a tiny corner of your mind. Not dramatically, not overnight, but it's like cleaning out a dusty attic one box at a time. It's slow magic, the kind that lasts. So here's your quiet invitation. Don't fight your thoughts. Get curious about them. Where did they come from? Are they helpful? Would you say them to someone you love? If not, maybe they don't belong in your home anymore. And when they return, and yes, they will, just greet them with a smile and say, "You're not in charge here. Because now you're watching, now you're choosing, and that's everything." There's something quietly terrifying about comfort, not the soft blanket, hot cocoa kind. I'm talking about the comfort we find in suffering, the strange, sticky familiarity of pain that wraps itself around us like an old sweater. Scratchy, heavy, but somehow safe. I didn't notice it at first. For the longest time, I thought I was just unlucky, always ending up in the same emotional dead ends, replaying the same painful loops. But one day, while scrolling mindlessly at 1 a.m., as one does when trying to avoid actual feelings, a random quote slapped me right across the soul. We don't repeat what we love. We repeat what we're used to. And just like that, it clicked. I wasn't addicted to sadness. I was attached to familiarity. The self-doubt, the unworthiness, the inner dialogue that read like a bad Yelp review of my own existence. It wasn't comforting, but it was known. And sometimes the known is more seductive than the unknown. This is where it gets complicated. Because no one wakes up and says, "You know what? I think I'll be miserable today." But when you've never been shown anything else, never taught how to feel safe inside your own mind, you start to build a home in your suffering. You decorate it. You memorize the creaks in the floor. You know exactly where the pain hides. And even though it hurts, it's yours. I had this realization one rainy afternoon, because of course it was raining. I was sitting by the window, watching the drops race each other when it hit me. I'd gotten so used to being hard on myself that the idea of being kind to myself felt foreign, like speaking a language I'd never learned. And the more I talked to people, the more I saw the pattern. We say things like, "I'm just being realistic," or "That's just how I am." But often, what we're really saying is, "This pain is all I've ever known, so I guess it must be the truth." There's an academic debate about whether emotional states become habitual through neural pathways or whether they're more deeply tied to identity formation. Jung would probably just raise an eyebrow and say, "You are not your past, but you are responsible for what you carry." And I was carrying a lot, like the belief that rest equals laziness, that asking for help makes me weak, that joy has to be earned like some cosmic reward system based on how much you've suffered. None of those beliefs were mine, but I wore them like armor. armor I didn't know I could take off. And here's the side note that completely changed the game. We were taught how to memorize, obey, and achieve, but no one ever taught us how to think. Seriously, think about it. We had classes on algebra, the mitochondria, and how to write a 5-paragraph essay, but not one lesson on emotional regulation. Nothing on how to examine a thought, question its validity, or sit with discomfort without turning it into self-hate. And because of that, we improvise, we survive, we repeat patterns we don't understand because no one ever handed us the manual for our own minds. But here's the good news. It's never too late to learn. One evening, I decided to do something wild. I sat down with an old childhood photo of myself. Not for nostalgia, but for conversation. I looked at my own face, gap-toothed, eyes too big for my head. And I asked, when did I start believing you weren't enough? I didn't get a verbal answer, of course, but I felt it. Felt the sting of moments when my big emotions were met with silence. When being sensitive was called dramatic. When asking questions was interpreted as rebellion. Each one a brick in the house of pain I'd built and called personality. But that night, I decided to start redecorating. Because maybe, just maybe, that house could become a sanctuary. Not by ignoring the pain, but by finally giving it a voice. Carl Jung said that the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. And he wasn't wrong. Because self-acceptance doesn't mean you get to skip the mess. It means you invite the mess in and stop pretending it's not part of the story. And that, my friend, is the beginning of real healing. I remember an old woman from my neighborhood growing up, Mrs. Navarro. She had a voice like velvet and wore these enormous clip-on earrings. She once told me, "Mi amor, the wound is not your identity. It's your initiation." I didn't get it back then. But now, it's tattooed on my soul. The pain isn't your personality. The suffering isn't proof that you're deep or worthy or real. You don't have to keep feeding it just because it's familiar. You can choose differently, slowly, gently. Start by noticing your habits. Do you flinch at compliments? Do you sabotage good things before they can root? Do you replay every mistake like it's a sports highlight reel? That's not your fault. That's programming. But it is your responsibility to rewire it. And here's how it begins. With awareness. Not by fixing everything overnight, but by whispering to yourself, I'm willing to see this differently. That's it. That's the first seed. Because when you finally stop being friends with suffering, when you stop calling your pain home, you create space for something new. And that space? That's where freedom lives. I was sipping lukewarm coffee on a Sunday morning, staring at the little brown ring it left on the page of my journal, when I realized something embarrassingly obvious. I had spent more time trying to erase my negative thoughts than replacing them. Like a gardener yanking out weeds and then just walking away. No new seeds, no care for the soil, just bare earth, hoping it would magically sprout roses out of regret. That's not how it works. You don't just rip out the old. You have to plant the new. It sounds poetic, right? But when you're knee-deep in emotional mud, that's not what you're thinking about. You're thinking, how do I stop the chaos? Not, what do I want to grow instead? And that was my mistake. I kept trying to kill the darkness without ever learning to nurture the light. Carl Jung didn't teach that you conquer the shadow by force. He said you integrate it. That means acknowledging it, yes, but also building something stronger beside it. That's where the metaphor of the inner garden comes in. And trust me, I'm no green thumb. I once killed a cactus. But even I can understand this. If you don't plant something on purpose, weeds grow by default. Our minds are the same. That's when I decided to tend to my mind like soil, not just by pulling out the negative, but by intentionally sowing new beliefs, new affirmations, new stories. It started small. I wrote down one thought each morning that I wanted to water, not a Pinterest quote or a self-help buzzword. Something that actually stirred something in me. Something that felt like a stretch, but not a lie. I am allowed to take up space. I deserve softness even when I'm struggling. I'm not broken, I'm becoming. And every morning I'd repeat one out loud while making coffee. At first it felt awkward, like rehearsing for a play I didn't believe in yet, but over time, it started to sink in. There's real science behind this too. Neuroplasticity shows that our brains can actually rewire themselves based on repeated thought patterns. That's not woo-woo, it's chemistry. You can teach your mind a new rhythm, but only if you commit to the practice. It's like that old advice from my high school music teacher, Mr. Danner. He said, "Practice doesn't make perfect. Practice makes permanent." And unfortunately, I'd been practicing self-sabotage for years. No wonder it felt natural. So I started journaling differently. Instead of just venting, though, let's be real, venting is cathartic, I began planting. I'd end each entry with a few lines of something I wanted to remember, especially when my brain was acting like a dramatic poet in a thunderstorm. Things like, "This feeling is temporary. I am the narrator, not the noise. My worth is not up for debate today." You'd be surprised how much that changes your internal landscape. Now, there's a public academic debate about whether affirmations work if you don't believe them. Some studies say yes, some say no. But here's what I found. It's not about believing them instantly. It's about repeating them until they stop feeling like strangers. It's like meeting someone new. At first, it's awkward. But over time, you let your guard down. You trust them. The words start to feel like they belong. That's what it felt like with my affirmations. They went from, "I wish this were true," to, "Maybe this is true," to eventually, "Of course this is true." And here's where the garden metaphor gets interesting. A gardener doesn't just water the plants once and expect magic. It's daily work, sunlight, pruning, patience. The same goes for our thoughts. You have to check in with yourself, feed the good ones, starve the harmful ones, know the difference. Let me give you a quirky example. I had a friend, let's call her Rita, who treated her self-worth like a bonsai tree. She trimmed it carefully, protected it from bad weather. She even wrote sticky notes on her mirror like, "I am worthy of respect, even when I mess up." I asked her once, "Do those really work?" She smiled and said, "They don't have to work right now. I just want them to be louder than the other voices." That stuck with me, because let's be honest, those negative voices aren't going to pack their bags and leave overnight. Some of them have been squatting in your mental attic for years, smoking self-doubt cigars and complaining about everything you do. But when you start planting better thoughts, you give them competition. And eventually, the weeds stop getting all the sunlight. That's the transformation no one talks about. Not the big dramatic glow-up, but the subtle shift, the moment your first instinct changes. When you make a mistake, and instead of shouting, "Idiot!" you whisper, "It's okay, I'm learning." That whisper? That's the bloom. One day, I caught myself mid-spiral. I'd said something awkward in a meeting and was about to start the usual self-roast. But something else rose up instead. A gentle thought. That was human. Not horrible. I blinked, paused, smiled a little. That thought, it wasn't rehearsed. It just showed up. And in that moment, I knew the garden was growing. So if you're stuck in the cycle, always pulling out weeds but never planting anything new, maybe today's the day you start. Not by pretending everything is fine, but by asking, what do I want to believe instead? Start there, write it down, water it, say it out loud, even if your voice shakes. Because what you plant is what will bloom. And you, my friend, deserve to bloom. I was lying on my back, watching clouds shift across a blue-gray sky, when the metaphor finally hit me in a way that no therapist, book, or motivational podcast ever quite managed. I am not the cloud. I am the sky. It sounds simple, poetic, Instagrammable even, but in that moment, it landed deep. It was more than a quote. It was a truth I felt in my bones. You see, most of us grow up thinking we are our thoughts, that if we feel anxious, we are anxiety. If we feel sadness, we are sad. If we think we're worthless, then, hey, must be true. But we're not. We're not the thoughts drifting through us. We're the space they drift through. You are not your anger. You are the container that holds it. You are not your panic. You are the field where it passes. You are not your fears. You are the wide open sky they temporarily cloud. This shift in perspective is life-altering. And it's also a little weird at first, because when you've been in the storm long enough, you start identifying with it. Like someone who's been underwater so long, they forget what dry feels like. But once you remember the sky, everything changes. There's a public academic debate about whether mindfulness practices detach people from reality or bring them closer to it. I'd argue Jung would say, it depends on whether you're observing or escaping. When I started meditating, not fancy, not guided, just sitting quietly, I wasn't looking for enlightenment. I just wanted the noise to quiet down. It didn't. Not at first. In fact, it got louder. My brain decided meditation was the perfect time to revisit every social misstep I'd ever made. Remember that thing you said in 2012? No? Well, your neurons do. But I stuck with it. 5 minutes, then 10. Just breathing. Just noticing. And then one day, in the middle of a mental tangent about whether I'm annoying in group chats, a quiet thought appeared. You don't have to follow every thought that invites you. It was like someone inside me had dimmed the lights and said, let's not do this tonight. That was the beginning of awareness, not control, not perfection, just awareness. I started noticing the difference between thoughts that came from fear and thoughts that came from truth, between the ones that echoed someone else's voice and the ones that sounded like me. That kind of discernment is the beginning of freedom. Because when you don't identify with every thought, you get to choose which ones stay. You stop reacting. You start responding. Let me give you a quirky analogy. You ever been to a busy airport? You know how there are those loudspeaker announcements constantly playing, gate changes, flight updates, someone's missing a suitcase? Your thoughts are kind of like that, a constant stream of noise. But you're not the speaker. You're the traveler, deciding which announcements actually apply to you. Flight to self-hate now boarding at gate 7? Nope, not mine. Delayed departure for hope and healing? That one. I'll wait. It's a ridiculous metaphor, but it works, because it reminds you. You don't have to board every thought that shows up. Carl Jung believed that to evolve, we must learn to observe our inner world without becoming enslaved to it. That means letting thoughts pass through, without attaching, without panicking, without trying to escape them. That's not disconnection. That's power. One night, after a long day of mental noise, I sat quietly and asked myself, which thoughts are just weather, and which ones reflect the real me? The answer? Almost all of them were weather. Storms that came from stress, winds from a bad sleep, thunderclouds of comparison. None of them were truths. They were just passing systems. And I was the sky. I learned something else, too. Thoughts often repeat not because they're meaningful, but because they're habitual. The brain loves efficiency. So if you've thought, "I'm not good enough," 10,000 times, guess what pops up automatically on day 10,001? But here's the kicker. Thoughts are not commands. They're not truths. They're suggestions. And just like a junk email, you can hit delete. One of the best pieces of old age wisdom I've ever gotten came from a retired stage actor I met on a train. He said, "I never believed the character. I just played him. And when the curtain dropped, I left him on stage." Our thoughts, they're just characters, and we can stop giving the lead role to the ones that sabotage us. Of course, there will be days when the clouds are thick, when you forget you're the sky, when you believe the storm again. That's okay. Just return. Return to the breath. Return to the stillness. Return to that quiet place behind the thought. Because here's the truth. You are never more than one breath away from awareness. And once you're aware, even if the storm is still raging, you remember, it won't last. It never does. That's the promise of the sky. It always returns. There's a part of you, yes, you, that you probably haven't met yet. Not the version who answers emails, not the one who folds laundry while listening to true crime podcasts, and definitely not the one who second-guesses every single text before hitting send. No, I'm talking about the inner warrior, not the sword-swinging, helmet-wearing cliché from fantasy movies. Jung's inner warrior is different. He's not trying to conquer the world. He's fighting for your soul. Quietly. Every day. In the tiny, invisible moments that no one else sees. Like when you choose to get out of bed even though the weight of your own thoughts feels like quicksand. Or when you respond with patience to someone who triggers you because you refuse to let your shadow run the show. That's the warrior, and he's already inside you. Jung believed deeply in archetypes, universal symbols within the human psyche. The mother, the trickster, the sage, and the warrior. Each of them lives within us, waiting to be awakened. The warrior, in particular, doesn't fight for ego or dominance. He fights for alignment, for truth, for inner freedom. But here's the wild part. Most people only awaken their warrior when they have no other choice. It's not comfort that brings him out. It's crisis. I learned this the hard way. A few years ago, I hit a wall. Not metaphorically. I literally fainted at work from burnout. One minute I was staring at a spreadsheet. The next, I was staring at fluorescent ceiling tiles with a dull pain in my skull and a nurse handing me orange juice. Dramatic, right? But also predictable, because I hadn't been listening. Not to my body, not to my thoughts, not to the aching voice inside me saying, "This isn't living." That day, something inside me cracked. Not in a way that broke me, in a way that opened me. I realized I'd been living under siege, battling thoughts of unworthiness, drowning in people-pleasing, and hiding behind performance like it was armor. But the truth? I wasn't protecting myself. I was imprisoning myself. And that's when the warrior woke up. Not all at once, not with a roar, but with a whisper. You're allowed to stop running. There's a public academic debate about whether personal transformation happens gradually or in sudden awakenings. Jung might say it's both. Some truths arrive like lightning, others like sunrise. For me, the warrior began with small, defiant acts of self-respect. Turning off my phone when I needed silence. Saying no without explaining. Breathing deeply when I wanted to scream. holding space for myself when I messed up instead of attacking myself with shame. These were battles, make no mistake, just internal ones, and each one built strength. Not muscles, not grit. Soul strength. It reminded me of a story my grandfather used to tell, about his time working on fishing boats in his 20s. "The sea," he'd say, "never stops testing you, but if you know your center, you won't capsize." I used to think he meant steering the boat. Now I know he meant steering the self, because here's what no one tells you. The world isn't always going to get easier. People won't always be kind. Your job won't always be secure. The path won't always be smooth. But if you train your mind, if you train your warrior, then no matter what chaos surrounds you, your center will hold. I like to imagine the warrior like this. He's calm, steady. He's not trying to silence the mind's negativity. He's just not buying into it anymore. He hears the voices. You're failing, you're a fraud, you're falling behind, and responds with, "Thanks for sharing. I'll be over here living." You can feel him, can't you? Stirring a little as you read this. He's the one who rises every time you fall, the one who pauses in pain and whispers, "But we're still going." And no, the warrior isn't always fearless, but he does it anyway. He speaks kindly to the wounded parts. He calls out the lies when they dress up as truth. He doesn't flinch when the shadow appears. He looks it in the eye and says, "I'm listening now, but you're not leading anymore." You know what else terrifies a negative mind? A mind that knows it has choice. The moment you stop being passive, the moment you start living on purpose, the moment you say, "I'm not waiting for confidence, I'm acting in courage," that's when the inner warrior steps forward. And once he's awake, you'll never go back to sleep the same way. Now, does that mean you'll never feel broken again? No, but each time you crack, he'll be there, holding the pieces, reminding you. We rise differently now. That's the quiet power of the warrior archetype. He's not flashy, he's not loud, but he is relentless in choosing growth over fear, peace over chaos, compassion over control. So if you've been waiting for someone to give you permission to stop fighting yourself and start fighting for yourself, this is it. Because the battle is already happening. Inside. Every single day. And it's time you started winning. It's wild how fast your mind can go from, "I've got this," to, "Why did I ever think I could do anything?" 1 second, you're feeling pretty okay. Maybe even hopeful. Then a random comment, a delayed reply, or a memory you didn't ask for pops up, and suddenly you're spiraling. Again. I used to think that meant I was unstable, too sensitive, or maybe just fundamentally flawed. But now I understand. Those were just scripts, old, dusty, inherited scripts that I kept performing like some exhausted actor in a never-ending one-person play. And the worst part? I didn't even write them. That's what Jung was trying to tell us when he said the unconscious runs our lives. He didn't mean there's some evil force hiding under your bed. He meant there are stories, deep, deeply embedded narratives, running the show without your permission. And unless you make them conscious, you'll live them out without realizing it. I remember the day I started noticing my script. I was journaling, again. Don't roll your eyes. Journaling does work. And I kept writing the same phrase over and over without meaning to. I always ruin good things. Ouch. Where did that come from? At first, I thought it was just a moment of insecurity. But when I traced it back, I saw the roots. A childhood filled with conditional love. Moments where happiness was yanked away without warning. Relationships that ended suddenly. Projects that fell apart after I got excited. So I wrote it again. But this time, I followed it with a new line. What if that's not true anymore? It felt like cracking a window in a room I didn't know had air. There's a public academic debate about how much of our behavior is shaped by schemas, mental patterns formed early in life. Some believe they're almost impossible to change. Others argue they're malleable with enough awareness. Personally, I think the truth lies in this. You can't change a script if you don't know you're reading from it. But once you do, once you see the line before it leaves your lips, you get to pause, to rewrite, to choose. That's what the inner work really is. Not glamorous, not always inspiring. Sometimes it's just sitting with your own thoughts and saying, "Hey, where'd you come from?" And then listening. I had this quirky little ritual I started doing after that. Whenever a negative thought showed up, I'd imagine it as a character from a play, usually in a terrible costume with a dramatically British accent. "You'll never be enough," it would say, wearing a cape and monocle. And I'd respond, "Okay, Shakespeare, but who gave you the script?" It's silly, but it helps. Because it creates distance. And in that space, you can choose something different. That's the power of conscious thought. Every time you interrupt a negative loop with a new question, every time you respond with curiosity instead of collapse, you're reshaping your brain's wiring. Literally. Neuroplasticity, baby. You don't have to believe the new thought right away. That's not the goal. The goal is to create room for it. So instead of, "I can't handle this," try, "I've handled hard things before." Instead of, "They don't care about me," try, "Maybe this isn't about me at all." Instead of, "I always screw it up," try, "What would it feel like to give myself grace right now?" You don't need to leap from self-loathing to self-love in one move. Just step sideways. Gently. It reminds me of something my neighbor once said. Holly, a retired poet who wore mismatched shoes on purpose. She told me over tea, "Darlin', healing isn't about deleting the old page. It's about picking up the pen and writing the next one." And you are the writer. Even if you've been living by someone else's draft until now, there's a strange freedom in realizing that most of our thoughts are just recycled input, not facts, not fate, just noise we never questioned. But now you're questioning them. You're watching. You're rewriting. It's not easy. Sometimes it feels like trying to steer a ship through fog without a map. But the more you do it, the clearer things become. And yes, some days you'll fall back into the old script. You'll say the line. You'll believe the lie. That's okay. Catch it. Pause. Reroute. The first thought may be involuntary. The second one is your power. You get to decide what stays. You get to decide what grows. And slowly, thought by thought, day by day, you become someone who responds with intention, not reaction, with love, not fear. That's how you become the author of your life. And trust me, your story's just getting started. Somewhere along the way, we were taught that the shadow is our enemy, that the messy parts, the jealousy, the anger, the guilt, the shame, are monsters we need to defeat. Or worse, hide. Tuck them under our beds like dust we hope no one sees, especially not the people we want to impress. But Carl Jung flipped that idea on its head. He said the shadow isn't here to destroy you. It's here to teach you. And at first, I resisted that idea. Like, why would I willingly turn toward the part of me I've spent a lifetime trying to silence? But the truth is, ignoring the shadow doesn't make it go away. It just makes it sneakier. You ever find yourself reacting way too hard to something tiny? Someone leaves you on red, and suddenly you're spiraling. Or a coworker gets praise, and your chest tightens in this ugly, unexpected way. That's the shadow showing up in disguise. not because it wants to sabotage you, but because it's trying to get your attention. See, the shadow doesn't knock politely. It crashes in through passive aggression, insecurity, self-sabotage, perfectionism. It shows up when you're tired, when you're stressed, when you're just trying to cope. And unless you face it, it keeps running the show from backstage. One of the most life-changing things I've ever done was to stop seeing those thoughts as enemies and start seeing them as invitations. Because here's what I discovered. A negative thought is often just a wounded part of you trying to speak. It's not evil. It's hurt. And when I started approaching those moments with curiosity instead of judgment, something shifted. I'd ask, why do I feel small right now? Where did I learn this kind of shame? What is this reaction really about? Sometimes the answers came quickly. Sometimes they came after days of silence, but they always came. And every answer brought me closer to myself. There's a public academic debate in psychoanalysis around whether facing the shadow strengthens the ego or dissolves it. Jung's stance? It refines it. The shadow, when acknowledged, becomes integrated. No longer a threat, just a part of you with new instructions. It's like reuniting with a family member you were taught to be ashamed of, only to discover they've been misunderstood all along. I had a shadow moment not too long ago. A friend of mine was succeeding, like really succeeding. Their life was blooming in every area while I was knee-deep in doubt. I congratulated them, smiled, even bought them a cupcake. But later, at home, I felt this bitter ache in my chest. Envy. My first instinct? Shame. You're a bad friend. You should be better than this. But instead of letting that thought spiral, I got curious. What was underneath that envy? It wasn't resentment. It was grief. Grief for the version of me that still felt behind. The one who thought success had a deadline and I'd missed it. Once I saw that, the bitterness softened. I cried a little. Then I wrote a loving letter to the part of me that felt like she was failing. That's shadow work. Not dramatic rituals or spiritual acrobatics, just the simple act of not abandoning yourself when the darkness surfaces. I remember something my older cousin told me when I was a teenager. She said, "Your feelings are like children. You don't let them drive the car, but you don't stuff them in the trunk either. The shadow isn't supposed to lead your life, but it does deserve a seat, a voice, a chance to be heard, healed, and integrated. Otherwise, it leaks. It leaks into your relationships, making you distrustful. It leaks into your goals, making you self-sabotage. It leaks into your peace, making you restless even when life is calm. But when you face it, really sit with it, it transforms. Anger becomes clarity. Envy becomes direction. Guilt becomes accountability. Fear becomes wisdom. That's the alchemy Jung spoke of, turning lead into gold, not by pretending the lead isn't there, but by working with it. And if you're thinking, "But I don't even know where to start," here's the simplest step. Name it. Name the fear. Name the thought. Say it out loud or write it down. I feel like I'm never enough. I'm scared I'll be alone forever. I hate that I still think about what they said. Name it without flinching. Because the moment you name it, it loses its shadowy power. It becomes knowable. And what's knowable is manageable. You don't have to fix it today. You don't have to conquer it. You just have to meet it. That's how the healing begins. And maybe, just maybe, you'll find that the shadow you were so scared of was just a part of you longing to come home. Somewhere along the way, we were taught that the shadow is our enemy, that the messy parts, the jealousy, the anger, the guilt, the shame, are monsters we need to defeat. Or worse, hide. Tuck them under our beds like dust we hope no one sees, especially not the people we want to impress. But Carl Jung flipped that idea on its head. He said the shadow isn't here to destroy you, it's here to teach you. And at first I resisted that idea. Like, why would I willingly turn toward the part of me I've spent a lifetime trying to silence? But the truth is, ignoring the shadow doesn't make it go away. It just makes it sneakier. You ever find yourself reacting way too hard to something tiny? Someone leaves you on red and suddenly you're spiraling. Or a coworker gets praise and your chest tightens in this ugly, unexpected way. That's the shadow showing up in disguise. Not because it wants to sabotage you, but because it's trying to get your attention. See, the shadow doesn't knock politely. It crashes in through passive aggression, insecurity, self-sabotage, perfectionism. It shows up when you're tired, when you're stressed, when you're just trying to cope. And unless you face it, it keeps running the show from backstage. One of the most life-changing things I've ever done was to stop seeing those thoughts as enemies and start seeing them as invitations. Because here's what I discovered. A negative thought is often just a wounded part of you trying to speak. It's not evil, it's hurt. And when I started approaching those moments with curiosity instead of judgment, something shifted. I'd ask, why do I feel small right now? Where did I learn this kind of shame? What is this reaction really about? Sometimes the answers came quickly. Sometimes they came after days of silence. But they always came. And every answer brought me closer to myself. There's a public academic debate in psychoanalysis around whether facing the shadow strengthens the ego or dissolves it. Jung's stance? It refines it. The shadow, when acknowledged, becomes integrated. No longer a threat, just a part of you with new instructions. It's like reuniting with a family member you were taught to be ashamed of, only to discover they've been misunderstood all along. I had a shadow moment not too long ago. A friend of mine was succeeding. Like, really succeeding. Their life was blooming in every area while I was knee-deep in doubt. I congratulated them, smiled, even bought them a cupcake. But later, at home, I felt this bitter ache in my chest. Envy. My first instinct? Shame. You're a bad friend. You should be better than this. But instead of letting that thought spiral, I got curious. What was underneath that envy? It wasn't resentment. It was grief. Grief for the version of me that still felt behind. The one who thought success had a deadline and I'd missed it. Once I saw that, the bitterness softened. I cried a little. Then I wrote a loving letter to the part of me that felt like she was failing. That's shadow work. Not dramatic rituals or spiritual acrobatics. Just the simple act of not abandoning yourself when the darkness surfaces. I remember something my older cousin told me when I was a teenager. She said, "Your feelings are like children. You don't let them drive the car, but you don't stuff them in the trunk either. The shadow isn't supposed to lead your life, but it does deserve a seat, a voice, a chance to be heard, healed, and integrated. Otherwise, it leaks. It leaks into your relationships, making you distrustful. It leaks into your goals, making you self-sabotage. It leaks into your peace, making you restless even when life is calm. But when you face it, really sit with it, it transforms. Anger becomes clarity. Envy becomes direction. Guilt becomes accountability. Fear becomes wisdom. That's the alchemy Jung spoke of, turning lead into gold, not by pretending the lead isn't there, but by working with it. And if you're thinking, but I don't even know where to start, here's the simplest step. Name it. Name the fear. Name the thought. Say it out loud or write it down. I feel like I'm never enough. I'm scared I'll be alone forever. I hate that I still think about what they said. Name it without flinching. Because the moment you name it, it loses its shadowy power. It becomes knowable. And what's knowable is manageable. You don't have to fix it today. You don't have to conquer it. You just have to meet it. That's how the healing begins. And maybe, just maybe, you'll find that the shadow you were so scared of was just a part of you longing to come home. Silence isn't empty. It's a mirror. A place where everything you've tried to outrun eventually catches up with you. That's why we avoid it, right? We fill our ears with music, podcasts, TV noise. We scroll endlessly, not even sure what we're looking for, just trying not to hear ourselves. But silence, true silence, is where the healing begins. I didn't learn this because I wanted to. I learned it because I had to. After weeks of feeling like my thoughts were spinning in a washing machine set to haunting, I decided to try something I used to mock. Meditation. Not the sit on a mountain kind. I wasn't wearing robes. I was in pajamas, sitting cross-legged on the floor of my cluttered bedroom, surrounded by laundry and existential dread. But for 5 minutes, I just sat. I closed my eyes. I breathed. And wow. The noise in my mind was loud. It wasn't peaceful. It wasn't calming. At first, it was chaos. Like every unresolved emotion threw a party in my head and forgot to invite logic. But something strange happened. In the middle of that mental mess, a thought floated by. You don't need to fix this. You just need to watch. And so I did. I watched the thoughts rise and fall. Some were ridiculous. What if pigeons are government spies? Some were cruel. No one actually likes you. And some were just sad echoes of pain I hadn't processed. But I didn't chase them. I didn't try to change them. I just let them pass. That's the power of observation, of stillness, of not reacting. There's an ongoing academic tug-of-war over meditation. Is it just a trendy wellness tool or a true transformational practice? The research increasingly supports the latter. Meditation reduces anxiety, increases self-awareness, and rewires the brain's relationship with stress. Jung wasn't a meditation coach, but he did believe in inner reflection, in stillness, in the necessity of looking inward to find wholeness. He believed that in silence, we don't lose ourselves. We find ourselves. I remember an old neighbor of mine, Mr. Bellamy, retired piano teacher, wore bow ties to take out the trash. He once told me, "Son, the notes between the notes, that's where the soul lives." It took me years to understand that. Meditation for me became the space between the notes, the breath between thoughts, the silence where truth hums just beneath the chaos. I started with 5 minutes a day. No goal, no pressure. Just sit, breathe, observe. And if my mind wandered, I brought it back. And if it wandered again, I brought it back again. That returning, over and over, that's the practice, not perfection. Just return. Over time, something shifted. The negative thoughts didn't vanish, but they lost their urgency. They stopped feeling like commands, more like passing suggestions. You're failing. Maybe, maybe not. Let's breathe. You're alone. Not right now. I'm sitting with myself. That internal dialogue became softer, gentler. I began to understand that thoughts are like clouds, feelings like weather. But I am the sky, vast, still, unshaken by what passes through. And here's the quirky realization. You don't have to stop your thoughts in meditation. That's like trying to stop waves in the ocean. You just learn not to get swept away by them. You become the surfer, not the sea. And in that practice, you develop what Jung called the observing self, the part of you that sees without judging, witnesses without panicking. You stop being the problem and start becoming the space that holds the problem. It's subtle, but it's everything. Because once you experience yourself as the awareness behind the thought, you start to trust your own mind again. Not because it's perfect, but because you're in relationship with it now. Not enslaved, not at war. In relationship. Like two old friends learning to talk again after years of shouting. One day, while meditating, I had a memory surface that I hadn't thought about in a decade. Something painful, something I'd buried. And for a moment, I wanted to stop. To run. But then I remembered what I'd practiced. Don't react, just observe. So I sat with it, breathed through it, felt it without flinching. And then it passed. Just like a storm. And when it did, I felt lighter. Not because I healed it in that moment, but because I didn't hide from it this time. That's what meditation can do. Not erase your pain, but help you face it without fear. So if you're feeling overwhelmed, if your thoughts feel like an unstoppable flood, try this. Sit down. Close your eyes, set a timer for 5 minutes, and breathe. When thoughts come, let them. When emotions rise, watch them. When old stories try to pull you in, smile and say, "Not today." Because the real magic isn't in clearing your mind. It's in realizing you are not your mind. You are the stillness beneath it. And from that stillness, you get to choose again. I wish I could tell you that from here on out, everything will be smooth. That once you've done the work, meditated, journaled, whispered to your shadow in the moonlight, you'll never fall back into old thoughts again. But that wouldn't be the truth. Because here's the thing. The thoughts don't disappear. Not all of them. Not forever. Some come back, wearing new outfits, dressed as self-doubt, as comparison, as that quiet voice that shows up just when you thought you were finally free. But this time, you're not the same. You see them now. You recognize their shape, their tone, their favorite hiding spots. And most importantly, you know what to do. Not panic, not run, not believe them. Observe, breathe, respond. That's the quiet power you've been building this whole time. You're not erasing your past. You're no longer letting it drive. You're not becoming someone else. You're becoming more yourself. And that, my friend, is something most people never do. They live their entire lives reacting to thoughts they never chose, repeating stories they never questioned, chasing peace in places it doesn't live. But you've started writing something new. Let me tell you about one of the most powerful moments I've ever witnessed. I was at a silent retreat, surrounded by people I didn't know, each of us quietly fighting our own inner battles. There was this man, probably in his 70s, who sat across from me each morning during meditation. He didn't speak. No one did. But on the third day, as we gathered for our final silent breakfast, he slid a note across the table to me. Just one sentence, scribbled on a napkin. I finally forgave myself. I didn't ask for context. I didn't need it. I just nodded, and we sat in that shared silence, the kind that says more than words ever could. That's what this journey is really about. Not perfection, not transcendence, just returning to yourself, to your breath, to the truth that was always waiting underneath the noise. And that truth? You're not broken. You never were. You were just carrying stories that didn't belong to you. Stories passed down, spoken over you, absorbed in moments of vulnerability. But those stories are optional now. They always were. Carl Jung said, "Freedom is not found by denying the darkness, but by bringing it into the light." That's what you've been doing. Every time you've paused instead of panicked, questioned instead of collapsed, chosen curiosity over cruelty. That's you turning on the light. And in that light, the old monsters shrink. Not because they were fake, but because they were never as big as they pretended to be. It's funny how many of our fears dissolve the moment we stop running from them. How much peace we uncover when we sit quietly with what we thought would destroy us. And the most beautiful part? You don't have to do this all at once. You don't have to heal everything today. You just have to keep choosing the next moment, to write the next sentence, to speak the next kind word to yourself, to respond to the next negative thought with, "I see you, but I don't believe you." That's the new script now. That's the life you're building. And you're doing it not because everything is perfect, but because you finally understand. You don't need perfection to begin. You just need to be willing to pause, to feel, to face, to forgive. Willing to stand at the edge of your mind, look the storm in the eye, and whisper, "You don't run this place anymore." So when the next dark thought shows up, and it will, smile gently. Because you've been here before, and this time, you know the way back. Now that our journey is coming to a close, I want you to slow down. Breathe softer. Let your shoulders drop. This moment isn't about rushing forward. It's about honoring how far you've come. Over these past 15 chapters, we've walked through shadows and silence, doubts and dreams. We've met the thoughts that haunt you and the parts of you still learning how to be held. And through it all, something has been blooming. You, not a perfect version of you, not some hyper-optimized self-help ideal, just you, as you are, aware, awake, and maybe for the first time, compassionate with yourself. We've explored the nature of thoughts, the lie of inner perfection, the weight of inherited shame, and the beauty of mindful observation. We've breathed with pain instead of avoiding it. We've spoken to the warrior inside you and invited the shadow to sit at your table. And in the stillness of all of that, you remembered who you've always been. You are not your thoughts. You are the one who listens. You are not broken. You are becoming. Let the noise fade now. Let the old voices grow quiet. You don't need to fight them anymore. You've heard them, faced them, outgrown them. Tonight, rest in that truth. Tomorrow, you'll rise with a new lens, a softer inner voice, and the sacred knowing that your mind is no longer your master. It's your companion. And in that relationship, there is peace. End of script. Good night.